Hello and good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Dr. Selma Bartholomew, Dr. B here from Partner with Legacy. Thank you for joining us for our Legacy Ed News this morning. It's Thursday, June 24th. We are in the throes of June and looking forward to July, but let's not rush too much, right? It's graduation season. And we had a very momentous month of June. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our Legacy Ed News this morning. We have a dynamic panel member, Dr. Rhianna Rogers, and she is going to be talking with us about cultivating creativity and forging career pathways. And she is an activist, anthropologist. And so I'm looking forward to talking to her about her work. As always, we like to inform and to get started with our Legacy Ed News. And so as we are still in the month of June, this past weekend, we were honored to have President Biden, this historic moment of Juneteenth being a national holiday. And we commend him for those actions and for using his executive powers, right, to implement policy and change, and to create a space to recognize the warriors who have stood in the gap and done the work to take us to this historic moment. A couple of other ed news. We also see some data that Black parents are moving to homeschooling, that the data, and possibly as a result of COVID, but certainly opening up our views to different educational options from 3% to now about 16% of Black parents saying that they're willing to now educate their children in homeschool. And we're in New York. So the final piece I'm going to mention is also the mayoral race in New York. Eric Adams is leading. And we know that this is such an important race because he will be hopefully the mayor to lead us out of the pandemic, economic, as well as implications for schools. For those who don't know, we have the first African-American woman chancellor, Misha Ross Porter, and she's got a hard job. She's got to open up schools in September, and she's certainly been in the system for several years, but I think oftentimes when you step into a new leadership role, you may not get a honeymoon, right? And so although she may have been a principal and executive superintendent, she's got a hard job as she tries to work with all of the different unions in order to be able to open schools. And the final note, which kind of leads us into our discussion as well, is that there are now 25 state legislators seeking to ban critical race theory in schools, which speaks to the idea of talking about institutional racism and the impact on our schools, as well as our communities and our nation and as a world as a whole. So we thank you for joining us again. Make sure you like and subscribe. And I'm honored this morning to have with us a dynamic educator. And she has more than 20 years of experience as an educator, as a leader. As we work with our principals and always encourage them to take the next step, Dr. Rogers, in their leadership and seek that doctorate. She's a PhD researcher, been a principal investigator. And so she is currently an associate professor in interdisciplinary studies at SUNY Empire State College. She is an expert on cultural and ethnic studies, intercultural competencies, diversity education, cultural mediation, and virtual exchange programs. Dr. Rogers was also the inaugural Rockefeller Institute of Government Ernest Boyer President Fellow in the Center for Law and Policy Solutions in 2019-2020, and was the college-wide coordinator of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary studies. She has also won multiple awards, and so we commend her for her innovative approach to teaching and learning, including most recently the 2021 SUNY Empire State College James William and Mary Elizabeth Hall Endowed Award. And we're also excited and congratulate her as she is also stepping into a new role, and she will be leading the Center to Advance Racial Equity at the Rand Institute in the next 2 months or in the next month. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to have this conversation because it gives us a chance to really go to get into the depth and the breadth of her work, especially in this time with COVID-19. We know that we have civil unrest, but as for those who are are new to our audience, we are very focused on solutions and very focused on looking ahead and bringing the work of leaders like Dr. Rogers to the forefront, because we need the answers, right? We understand how individuals may be feeling, but we need to be able to move forward. So Dr. Rogers, let me give you a moment to introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll kind of get into the discussion around creating and cultivating creativity and forging career pathways.
Sure, and thank you for having me here, Dr. B. I'm excited to engage in this conversation. And I think, as you just said, finding ways to actually apply the research and work that we're doing in tangible outcomes is really critical, especially right now, given where we are, as you mentioned, social unrest. So thank you, audience, for watching this as well. As Dr. B said, my name is Dr. Rhianna Rogers. I always joke by saying I'm a little bit of everything because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I've had a career that has taken me into politics, has taken me into think tanks, has taken me into research. It's taken me to other countries to do work. And so all of that experience and applying this kind of anthropological activist hat, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has really helped me to be able to listen to others. I mean, that's going to be one of the biggest themes that you're going to hear me talk about, is really the best way to engage with people who may be different than you is to be an active listener, not always to be a talker.
Yeah. I'm excited because I think when most people hear the term anthropology, we have all of these predetermined mental models. And so we might imagine the Indiana Jones and, the archaeological digs. And so help our audience understand, what does it mean to be an activist anthropologist?
Sure. Well, let's simplistically break down the term anthropology itself. So anthro means human, ology means study of. So it's the study of humans. That's basically what anthropology is. Most people don't know this either. It's the parent discipline of other fields like psychology, sociology, which broke off because they became popular. But they all originated in the field of anthropology, which is the study of people. The activist component of anthropology, so activist anthropology, is a disciplinary approach that believes activism can enhance anthropological research. So what it really does is it positions the holders of knowledge, so that's why that active listening is important, at the foreground. So rather than my focus on what I want to find out, I listen to people, and it shapes the way that I create my studies. It also deconstructs the boundaries between kind of the academic world and what we call the real world, quote unquote. What that means is, rather than just applying theories that might exist only in kind of academic literature that only a few of us read, it actually applies real life case studies and situations to my work so that it can be more translatable, not just to academics, but to everyone. And then finally, it challenges this idea of us versus them. It actually, which let's go back to your example of Indiana Jones. If you look at the archaeological kind of myth, you have these, white male scholars who are going out and taking objects from indigenous people. That's not an even playing field, right? And so what my field, the activist anthropology approach, says is we have to debunk that. We're stepping away from that frame. And instead we're saying we're equal knowledge holders. I can learn as much from you as you can learn from me. And we position ourselves on the same level.
How exciting. And I say that because as we work with schools, research is such an important piece of the work, and getting our educators as well as our students, right, to understand research and to empower our students with those analytical skills. And so oftentimes, it's making those connections for students and making it real for them, right? And so as you mentioned, it's not just the theory. And so this is a unique space and an exciting space, because I don't think that when we talk to our kids and we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? We don't say, be an activist anthropologist. And so we're excited to have this conversation about your work and what it translates to. What does it look like? What does it feel like within the community? And so you've been engaged for the past 10 years in the Buffalo Project, right? And so, which actually is rooted in the community of Buffalo, right? So I want to hear a little bit about the Buffalo Project, and could you give a specific example about how it really connects community and culture and your work around anthropology?
Yeah, so the Buffalo Project has had many iterations. So I'll kind of give you the baseline of the theoretical framework. As we just mentioned, activist anthropology is at the core. But the mission of the Buffalo Project is to develop action-based diversity initiatives and cultural-based programming that focuses on utilizing participant observations of culture to inform solution-making efforts in both higher education and community situations. So think
Okay,
about
so
what I
wait right
just,
there, because so we heard
sure.
a lot right there, especially for our audience, right?
Yeah,
So I heard action-based research, and so
yes.
for especially, and I say that because a lot of our audience are educators as parents and students, but also leaders, right, who may be
Mhm.
stepping into the doctorate as well. And so action-based research. So what exactly is action-based research in the Buffalo Project? What does that mean?
Yeah, so there's a theoretical approach called participatory action research. And basically, think about that idea of what I mentioned that activist anthropology is. You ask people. So, participatory action research is the perfect kind of framework for me because you have to have participants provide you with information. You take that information and then you use it to create programming. So, it positions the individuals that talk to you at the center rather than the researcher. So this is really important because it's turning the power away from, you mentioned this title, doctor. Most of my students call me the anti-doctor doctor. And it's because I try to position people who traditionally don't have quote unquote power in an equal space with me. The reason that it's so important when you're doing something in a community is think about what you just said. We have these myths about what a doctor is. We think that they have more knowledge. We think that they, contain all the answers. When in fact, look what happened in 2020. The power of change occurred in the grassroots level. It
Yes.
actually bubbled up from that level up to make change.
Mhm.
If we were to use the framework, that kind of traditional top-down model where knowledge comes from the top, we would have never had happen what happened in 2020. We would have never had the civil rights movement. And so that's the reason why kind of participatory action research is at the baseline of the Buffalo Project. I've recognized from being an anthropologist, I've lived in indigenous communities. I've been through revolutions. They all start at the grassroots level. They never start at the top. And
Mm.
so I wanted to create a project that recognized that gave voice to that, and that actually built work from the bottom up. And I have to be, it's humbling to see this happen. And another reason I called it the Buffalo Project is, again, I didn't want it positioned on me. I wanted to be positioned on the community where this project came from. I'm excited to say that the Buffalo Project has moved across New York State and now is in 5 different countries.
Yes.
But it started with a group of individuals coming together and saying, let's understand what's going on. Let's collect data. We first started with the populations of students. So I had a pilot study. I'll give this as an example to your teachers. This literally grew out of a class. I had a class called US Histories Through Ethnology. It's now called American Cultural History. And I got rid of all exams. And instead, I replaced it with 2 participatory action research surveys where students had to go into communities that were not their friends, not their family, and they had to interview people different than them and ask them about culture.
Mm.
It was really powerful because if you know the history of Buffalo, New York, it actually is one of the most segregated cities in the United States, meaning that people were existing in separate communities, whether it be African American, Latin American, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, European, white American. They separated themselves and they didn't know each other. So everybody was existing through these concepts of stereotypes. So
Yes.
by creating this assignment, I forced them to step outside of their box, made them uncomfortable, but it was really exciting. And that began in 2010 and went through 2020. I collected so much information. It became such a popular course. I mean, my most popular course, people from across the college wanted to take it. Even though it was originally focused on Buffalo, it started to expand almost immediately to whole New York State. People wanted to do the study in their own cities. And I realized there was so much meat here that I turned it into a formalized project. Now, we've literally had 4 iterations of this project now. The first one focused on developing cultural openness and asking people what that means. The second iteration focused on multicultural awareness. The third iteration focused on building community. And the fourth iteration focused on social advocacy, which is where we are right now. We have all this great data. How do we take it out and really start to make change in the field?
What's exciting about your work is I think it's that intersection of community scholarship, right? And giving individuals the tools, the analytical tools that they need to reflect on who they are, as well as take the risks to get to know others, right? Through research, through questioning, through observation, and helping them to kind of design a study that they can learn more. And in learning about others, they also learn about themselves. And so I absolutely think, in this time frame, we need to know, how do you go about it? Because I think when you say, hey, we've got the data, but I think in reality, it's really the individuals going through this, right? They themselves, right, are growing and stretching and being transformed from doing this kind of work. And so when I started off this discussion today in the Ed News, where individuals are saying, hey, we want to ban critical race theory because they're so fearful of what it is, and not, some of it not knowing, but also, right, that stereotype of also not wanting to allow the evenness, right? Allow, keep pushing and keep saying that I own knowledge, I own this, right? And so I think that it's a piece that we need to know about as we look at how do we get our kids and how do we get all of our communities to get to know each other better. A key piece of your work is this idea of curiosity. And wondering and helping our kids and individuals become curious. So do you think that people are curious about each other when you've engaged in this work and 20 years as an educator, researcher, but doing this Buffalo project for more than 10 years? What did you find? Are they curious about each other?
I think they don't usually have the opportunity to be curious. I think because education is so structured, it limits the ability for creativity to be interjected. And that's one of the unfortunate elements of not having a space available for students. For example, applied learning has only really been kind of showcased in the last 5 to 6 years. You start hearing that term about taking your work and applying it to the field. Well, that's really unfortunate. It should have always been that way. It should have always given people those everyday experiences of how to utilize this research in real life. But that's a new concept being applied to higher education, and it's a new concept even being applied to K through 12. We need to keep pushing that. And, your question about individuals, here's a great example of something that I do. When any student, I have research appointments. So I'm going to tell you, I call them research associates, not research assistants. Think about that positionality. Assistant means lower, associate means you're at my level. I do that intentionally. But my research associates, when they come to me, I say, what are the 3 things you want to study? We build every single RA position based upon student and my collaboration. It's not, I give you this outline. We need more things like that, where instructors, teachers, educators are willing to give up a little bit of their power to those individuals to empower them. We need to create a space that allows for empowerment, allows for upskilling. So that means you also have to have scaffolds along the way, opportunities, supports for people to be able to learn things, other mentorship opportunities. That's critical. But we really need to create these environments that do 2 things. That one, create safe space, that ability for you to be safe to talk about things. But the really more important one to me is brave space. This is when you can get into an environment where you are safe enough to talk with somebody who's exactly opposite than you. And there's respect that's built into the process for you to engage and know that it's okay to think differently, but you can still engage in an intellectual dialogue. That we haven't done very well.
And what a powerful mental model, right? Safe space and brave space, taking those risks to find your voice and to do it with, as you mentioned, with respect and rapport. But I also think the piece that's also missing is that absolutely, right, historically, knowledge is, right, housed in this very kind of Western frame of mind, right? As you mentioned, you're the doctor, you have all the power, you do as I say. And even as you've gone through, right, you've got a PhD, what that whole process is certainly varies on terms of mentors. But I don't think we can create that change unless we truly make a commitment to getting diversity in the teaching staff, diversity at the university, as well as diversity at the K-12 level, right?
Mhm.
And certainly you certainly just begin by diversity by saying, hey, I want individuals that look differently. But I know as an educator, right, you need to have the content as well as the pedagogy. You need to be able to be skilled in it, but we at least have to take a step. So I find that if we don't have individuals who understand, right, who have lived the work, and as we hear your passion and your energy, right, you live it and know it and understand it. And so how do we even get to that point of being able to help our kids become curious, wonder, if they don't have access to individuals who think differently, individuals who see things differently, who problem solve, differently. Have you found that in terms of your work at the university level?
Yeah.
How do you connect with those your research associates?
So this is actually a direct link. I just created a LinkedIn learning course about BIPOC mentorship that's about to come out. And this is one of the areas that's most lacking, is a true mentorship model that recognizes many of the things you're describing. The realities of being somebody who comes from a Black, Indigenous, and people of color background, how there's positionalities, this power and privilege that I'm talking about, with kind of a Western way of thinking, with, the unfortunate kind of deleting of many diverse histories, recognizing that first. So in this course, as it comes out, and I'll share that with your audience, the details when it does come out, we start about this mentorship process of recognizing the realities of the differences. We say, like, historical trauma is real. Institutional racism is real. We have to acknowledge that these structures exist and they impact the way that racial equity plays out in everyday life. If you kind of skip over that and you pretend that it doesn't exist, then you're only adding to the traumas that these populations have faced. I have actually told my research associates, I have a mixture of groups of students, and they're from all backgrounds. I mean, I do that on purpose. But one of the things that I've done in my mentor program is I will tell these realities to all the mentees. I tell them, I say, look, everybody has different experiences. Your challenge is going to be to ask them why their experience is similar or different than yours, and to hear them, so that you're also not only gaining information about what your particular interest is, but you're developing intercultural competencies. You're developing the skill to be able to say, you know what, I can recognize that I might have some privileges in this area, but guess what? I'm also lacking in this area. And I can recognize that, I can speak that, I can give it voice, but by doing that, I can also find pathways for me to upskill in the areas that I need help in, or to use my privilege to help someone else. That is critical. And I think that we have to think more holistically about people and the way that we're mentoring, not just about teaching, but not just about learning, but about the holistic person.
I so agree. And I don't know if when you consider the skill sets, right? The skills and the talent needed in order to do this very brave work, to create a brave space, you need individuals, right? Who help you to learn how to be brave, individuals who themselves, who let you know that, being brave really is about finding your voice and taking those risks to just share your voice and to do it, as you mentioned, in a respectful way, and understanding that these are really hard issues. So I want to go back to the question of creativity and wondering. When we think about our educational system, and we see so many of our students who end up in all of these different tracks, and when we see a student who, you graduate from a college, you get a college degree, and you have so much debt and debt burdens, and then you still feel like, I can't find my purpose, I don't know my passion. And I certainly do think it's about your curriculum, and it is about maybe individuals who might have chosen a career because it sounded good. Hey, go be an accountant. There's money there, and that's not a bad thing. But how does that wondering fit in terms of forging pathways, for students. And and before you answer that, let me just remind our audience, we're talking with Dr. Rogers, and we're having a conversation around cultivating creativity and forging pathways, and also this intersectionality of race and community, and how do we go about doing that well. So please make sure you like and subscribe. So Dr. Rogers, talk to us as we kind of come to the tail end of our discussion around for our young people, and why wondering is so important in terms of making career decisions.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty much at the heart of what I do. I mean, wonder and activism are connected. If you wonder about somebody else and you ask questions, why do you think that way, rather than making assumptions, you have the power to gain knowledge, which makes you care about the things impacting others. Knowing and caring about issues from different perspectives is the baseline of wonder. It gives you that opportunity to be willing to listen and respect other views around you and understand issues from different viewpoints. It lets you also know that you need these brave and safe spaces to create those type of really productive conversations. It creates this kind of diverse group buy-in. Think about what I mentioned about my RAs are required to learn about each other. It creates a sense of community, and it creates this kind of meaningful exchange for people to say, you know what, I think this way, I think that's way, but let's figure out something together. It also acknowledges that all perspectives are important, no matter if you agree or disagree with them, which each one of them will impact our future. So guess what? If you wonder about somebody who has an extremist view on one side of a coin or another, if you want to go into policy reform, you will have the ability to understand how to reach that person. If you ignore them and you put yourself in a bubble to people that are only like-minded, you're never going to know how to impact them. You won't be able to speak across partisan lines. The other piece is, if you want to make positive changes that move society forward, you have to understand that everyone is part of your society, no matter if you like it or not. And you have to recognize that. There's no way to avoid it. And I mean, think about this. Wondering and thinking about, why you're doing what you're doing helps you to be a better global citizen. I mean, this globe is more interconnected than it's ever been before. We are not operating in vacuums of separate countries. The way that weather is changing, the way that commerce is changing, the way that politics are changing, are all impacting us, no matter if it's happening across the globe or right next to us, next door. So we have to be informed.
Yeah, this pandemic has certainly demonstrated, right, that we are not isolated, that we are very much connected. And I think this idea that you're speaking to in terms of having leaders who actually value that, who value diversity, who value the fact that we are connected, and being curious about the fact that you can have different opinions. We don't have to all agree. And who wants to? Matter of fact, that's not what thinking is, right? That's absolutely, don't agree with me because I'm Dr. B. I want you to question. I want you to have those analytical skills, those habits of mind of being curious. And it does make such a difference for our young people. I would love it if we realize that to be creative is also about that your life is this masterpiece, that really what you're creating every single day, right, is a life worth living, a life of service, a life that you can be proud of at the end of the day and say, job well done. I want to close out with a question around policy. And first, congratulations to you in stepping into another role in the leadership journey and the transformational work that you do. You will be heading to the RAND Institute, world-renowned around policy and research, and leading the Center to Advance Racial Equity. So tell us about maybe one policy that you think, based on the body of work that you've been engaged in, that you think should be advanced if we are truly getting to this point of racial equity. What would you like to see by way of policy?
Yeah, so I am really excited about the Center to Advance Racial Equity Policy. Really, in this center, we're focused on exactly what I'm talking about, finding solutions. My model that I created in the Buffalo Project, I'm bringing with me. So I want to collect as many voices as possible. That's literally what I'm doing right now. I'm listening to people. I'm hearing what people are saying. I'm going to as many meetings as I can, because the diversity of voice is so important. There are many things on the table that people care about right now. I mean, many, many things. There's economic disparities. There's redlining. There's reparations. There's, the digital divide. I was just recently on a panel, which was digital equity for the Department of Education in New York, and understanding K-12 education and how few people access true technology, right?
Yes.
They don't have computers. The assumptions that people make about how much technology is divided in society is truly not reflective of data. And so one big thing that I'm focused on is making sure that we're looking at data. There's a big initiative that RAND has been doing that's called truth decay. And this is something about misinformation, right? So how big of a deal that is, and how people are so polarized by information that might not be data-based, which is really, really unfortunate as we see right now. So I really want to make sure that data is driving what we're doing. Information that I'm collecting is driving what we're doing. So we can implement policies that are not based on emotion, that are not based on something that could change in every 5 seconds, right? That really it's following a truly kind of methodological approach, like participatory action research. One initiative that I'm really pushing hard to put in place right now is to develop the next generation of leaders. And that is through a process of micro-credentialing. So I'm creating a bunch of micro-credentials. As you mentioned earlier, how do you create a framework? Well, you got to train people to do this. You can't just assume they have these skills. So anybody listening out there, I will tell you, come to me. I want to help you learn skills. My goal in this world is to make it better. And so anybody who's willing to do this, come alongside. Let's partner. Let's do something. Let's make the change in our young people so that the next generation is informed and that they have the ability to truly make change in their communities.
What an exciting next step and exciting new territory for you. We wish you the best in it, and know that you're not alone in this work. I think as we work with our schools, it is about voice. Our work in math and STEM is all about helping people develop those analytical skills, right? Because you have to know how to think, and you have to be willing to engage in thinking, and also to let our kids know that thinking is not, it's supposed to be hard, right? And it's not supposed to be something that's easy, but it's also supposed to be fun, and there's reward to it. I think as we come to a close, we just want to also, as I mentioned, Dr. Rogers is saying partner with us, because it makes a difference to be able to have like-minded, not all in agreement, but individuals, right, who have a certain value system, who value voice, who value change, who value community, and is seeking, right, to build community. And we have to be able to do that to truly end failure, the reproduction of failure in our schools and our systems, keep reproducing. So as we thank the audience for joining us this morning for our LegacyED News, please make sure you like and subscribe. Also, I'm inviting you to take a look at some of the other content that we have. Last week, we did a wonderful webinar on financial education, and all of this connects. We could probably spend the next few hours, talking about, right, how all of these things relate. But also, this is also about doing the work. So my final question for you, Dr. Rogers, is: it will take the courage to do what? If you had, as you reflect on this, if you can offer our educator or parent an advice and say, hey, it's going to take courage, what would you say would take courage to do what?
It takes courage to step outside of your comfort zone. And I would say that's the number one way for anybody to make progress, is you have to make yourself uncomfortable. You have to be able to willing to say, I'm gonna expose myself to someone different than me. I'm gonna expose myself to something that I don't agree with, so that I can learn from it, and that I can process it, and then I can understand. The final thing I usually tell my students is, you can be super passionate about something and you can feel strongly about it, but guess what? Someone can feel exactly the same passion on the opposite side of the coin. So you have to recognize that. And if you can recognize and respect that, then there's so many opportunities you can have to learn from each other.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. And so we can find you at Empire State College, SUNY, as well as she's also on the RAND. And so we will make sure and put it in the box below where individuals can link and to connect to your work. We wish you all the best, and special thanks for sharing your voice and the brave spaces that you are working to create with us. To our audience, we look forward to seeing you next week. I also invite you to check out the Dr. Selma B Show. Tonight, we have a special new dates and times with Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Go to mnn.org and hit the HD channel. We will actually be on channel 5 now on Thursdays for the summer and also Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. And I look forward to seeing everyone back next Thursday again for our Legacy Ed News. And once again, please make sure you like and subscribe. Help Partner with Legacy break the YouTube glass ceiling. Thank you so much. And wishing everybody a wonderful day and a closeout to the